The Amazon rainforest, we hear about it constantly, right? It's this huge engine for the planet's carbon cycle.
Absolutely crucial. And, the headlines for years have been dominated by crisis.
Exactly. Drought, fire, heat. It all sounds pretty grim. I mostly think about how vulnerable the Amazon is.
That's the common narrative, yeah.
But what happens when you actually dig into the ground level data? Forget the satellite views for a moment.
Right. Get boots on the ground.
Yeah, this is about 3 decades of researchers physically measuring individual trees. We're talking 188 mature, untouched forest plots. Just relentless data collection.
It's an incredible data set, really long term.
So our mission today is a deep dive into that data, because the main finding is, well, it's stunning. It goes against everything you'd expect. Despite all those climate stressors we hear about, the trees in the Amazon are consistently getting bigger.
That's the headline finding, and it really does shift the conversation, doesn't it?
It really does.
We're not just talking a tiny bit of growth here. The data shows the overall mean tree basal area, BA, we call it, has gone up across the whole Amazon basin.
Okay, unpack basal area for us a bit. What does that actually mean in terms of the forest?
Sure. So basal area is basically the cross-sectional area of a tree's trunk. Imagine slicing it horizontally.
Right.
It directly relates to the tree's size and its total biomass, how much stuff is in it. Think of it like the total footprint the trees take up on the forest floor.
Got it. So if the BA is increasing,
it means the forest itself is structurally changing. It's becoming more massive. The individual components are getting bulkier.
So if the forest is getting bigger, we obviously need to know why.
Yeah.
Especially, like you said, of all the talk about increasing drought and heat.
Exactly. This study is really tackling a fundamental conflict in how we understand tropical forests.
Which is?
Well, is the forest mainly benefiting from more resources? The big one being CO2 fertilization, more plant food in the air. Or is it primarily suffering from climate stress? The heat, the drought, which should make trees, especially big ones, more vulnerable. These forces often push in opposite directions.
Okay, let's get into the numbers then. How big was this change they measured?
It's significant. Over that 30-year period, the mean tree basal area increased by 3.3% per decade.
3.3% per decade, okay.
But here's where it gets really interesting in terms of forest structure. It's the giants, the really big trees, that are pushing that average up disproportionately.
How much faster are they growing?
The maximum tree size, so the very biggest stems they measured in those plots, increased even faster. They gained 5.8% per decade.
Wow, nearly double the rate of the average.
Yeah, it shows a real shift towards the upper end of this size distribution.
And you mentioned this was widespread. That seems important.
Critically important. It wasn't just one region doing well. They saw this consistent size increase everywhere they looked. The Brazilian Shield, way over in the Western Amazon, the East Central region, the Guiana Shield up north.
So that rules out purely local factors, like maybe one area recovering from a specific past disturbance.
Exactly. When you see the same trend across such vast, ecologically distinct regions, it points strongly towards a pervasive, basin-wide driver, something affecting the whole system.
Like a global change factor.
Precisely.
And what's the practical upshot of the big trees getting bigger? For carbon, for instance.
Well, that's central to the whole thing. It means the forest's total biomass, all that carbon stored in the wood, is becoming increasingly concentrated in those largest trees.
So fewer trees are holding more of the total carbon stock.
In essence, yes. The structure is shifting. You could almost think of it like wealth concentration. But for biomass, the big players are accumulating more.
Is there a way to measure that concentration?
There is. The study used something called the Gini coefficient. You usually hear about it in economics, right?
Yeah.
Measuring income inequality.
Yeah, how wealth is distributed in a population.
Same idea here, but applied to the area occupied by trees. If the Gini coefficient goes up, it means a smaller proportion of the trees, the largest ones, are taking up a larger share of the total space, the total basal area.
So it measures the inequality in size distribution. What did it show?
It showed that the Gini coefficient increased by 1% per decade across the plots.
Okay, so that confirms it mathematically.
It confirms that the biggest trees are really solidifying their dominance over the whole community. They're effectively outcompeting the smaller ones for light, probably water and nutrients too, and they're doing it consistently across the Amazon.
This structural shift, then, is the key piece of evidence.
It's crucial for understanding which ecological theories hold water when explaining how forests respond to global change.
Right, you mentioned competing ideas. Ecologists had these different predictions, these hypotheses for how forest structure might change.
That's right. 4 main ones were being debated.
Let's walk through them. The first one sounds like it fits the data we've just discussed. The winners take all idea, or WTA.
The WTA makes intuitive sense. Large trees already have an edge, right? They're up in the canopy getting most of the sunlight.
They've already won the height lottery.
Exactly. So if you suddenly give the whole forest a boost in resources, like more CO2 in the atmosphere, that advantage gets amplified. The strong get stronger.
And they grow even bigger, taking up even more light.
Which further suppresses the smaller trees trying to grow underneath them. The asymmetry just intensifies. That's the WTA prediction.
Okay, but then there's a complete opposite idea. Large trees lose, or LTL. What's the thinking there?
This is the climate stress argument. The idea is that the very largest trees, because they're so big and complex, might actually be more vulnerable.
Vulnerable to what?
To things like drought stress, they need huge amounts of water. To heat stress, they're also bigger targets for wind throw, getting blown over, or for lightning strikes.
Okay. So if climate stress was the dominant factor,
you'd expect to see increased mortality among the largest trees, and the average tree size across the forest would actually go down. That's the LTL prediction.
Makes sense. What about the other hypotheses?
Well, there's a more nuanced one called carbon limited benefit, or CLB. This one focuses on the little guys, the understory trees.
The ones living in the shade.
Exactly. They live perpetually close to their light compensation point, basically, just barely getting enough light to survive, let alone grow much.
Like living on the edge.
CLB suggests that even a small increase in atmospheric CO2 could make a huge relative difference to them. It might boost their photosynthesis just enough to give them a significant advantage in terms of growth and survival, even in low light.
So CO2 could alleviate some of that light stress for the small trees.
That's the idea. You'd expect better growth and survival for small trees, maybe less suppression overall.
And the last one?
The simplest one, really. Benefits shared. Maybe increased resources just help all trees grow a bit more or less equally across the board.
Okay, so 4 possibilities. Winners take all, large trees lose, carbon helps the little guys, or everyone benefits. Now, matching that to the actual measurements, what really stands out? It sounds like a mix.
It definitely looks like a mix, but with some clear winners and losers among the hypotheses.
The strongest signal seems to be for winners take all. Right. You said the biggest trees are increasing in size and number?
Absolutely. The evidence for WTA is compelling. The actual number of the largest stems trees, over 400 millimeters in diameter, so pretty substantial trees, that number increased significantly.
How fast?
It grew at a rate of 6.6% per decade. So not only are the biggest trees getting bigger, there are actually more of them over time. The giants are thriving and multiplying.
Which seems to slam the door on the large trees lose idea.
Pretty definitively, yes. The study found absolutely no evidence supporting LTL, no sign of increased mortality or decline in the size or abundance of these crucial large trees.
That's huge. It means whatever negative impacts climate change is having.
They are currently being completely overshadowed, more than compensated for, by the positive effects of increased resources, likely CO2. The net balance, for now at least, is strongly positive for these dominant trees.
Okay, but what about the understory? The CLB hypothesis. You said the story there was more complicated.
It is. It's quite paradoxical, actually. When you look at the smallest stems, those under 200 millimeters in diameter, their overall frequency, the sheer number of them, actually went down.
So fewer small trees. That sounds like suppression from the bigger ones winning, consistent with WTA.
It does suggest that, but here's the twist. The average size of those smaller stems that remained actually increased.
So they're disappearing, but the ones that survive are growing better.
Precisely. And that's where the carbon limited benefit idea comes back in. While overall numbers might be down due to competition, the increased CO2 seems to be helping the survivors grow faster than they otherwise would have in that deep shade.
So the relative growth rate, how did that compare?
Interestingly, the relative rate of size increase was actually pretty similar when you compared the really big trees and the really small trees that survived.
So even in the darkest part of the forest, the trees are growing faster proportionally.
Yes, which strongly suggests that elevated CO2 is alleviating that intense light limitation, boosting growth even for those understory survivors. That fits the CLB prediction quite well.
Okay, so the big picture emerging isn't just one hypothesis winning out. It's a combination.
It looks that way. You've got winners take all clearly operating at the large scale. Biomass is concentrating in the giants, which is accelerating the forest's carbon sink function.
Right.
But simultaneously, you have this carbon limited benefit effect happening in the understory. The surviving smaller trees are also growing faster, likely thanks to CO2, making the whole forest structure, top to bottom, effectively denser and growing more vigorously than before.
Which brings us squarely to the why. If this is happening everywhere, what's driving it? We need to rule out other explanations first, right?
Yeah.
Like forest recovery.
Absolutely. Could this just be the Amazon bouncing back from past disturbances, maybe natural events, or even, the legacy of historical land use by indigenous populations from centuries ago? We call that successional recovery.
How would we know if it was just recovery? What would we expect to see?
Well, if a forest is simply maturing after a disturbance, you typically see specific changes that this study didn't find.
Such
as a shift in the types of trees. As a forest matures, you often see a move towards species with denser wood. Denser wood stores more carbon and is generally more resistant to damage, typical of late successional old-growth forests.
Okay, did they see that shift?
No. The researchers looked specifically for this. They found no significant trend towards denser wooded species taking over, and the average wood density across the plots didn't really change over the 30 years.
That argues against simple maturation.
It does, and there's another key point. If it were just recovery, you'd expect the growth spurt to be much stronger in plots that started out younger or smaller, right? Forests that had more room to recover into.
Yeah, that makes sense. An old growth plot wouldn't recover as dramatically as a recently disturbed one.
Exactly. But what they found was that the increase in tree size was happening everywhere. Regardless of the initial size or maturity of the forest stand, it was independent of the starting conditions.
So consistent growth across the board, no shift to denser wood. That pretty much rules out succession as the main driver.
It makes it a very unlikely explanation for this widespread, consistent pattern, yes.
Which leaves us with the atmosphere.
It points strongly towards global atmospheric changes, and that brings us back to the most likely candidate, or perhaps the unlikely hero in this story, the steady increase in atmospheric CO2.
Plant food from the air.
Essentially, yes. It's the most logical explanation for a change that's so pervasive across the entire Amazon basin.
Could it be anything else from the atmosphere? Like nitrogen pollution. We hear about that driving forest growth sometimes.
That's something researchers considered. Nitrogen deposition is increasing globally, and it can fertilize forests, especially in temperate zones. But tropical forests, particularly mature ones like these, are usually thought to be limited more by phosphorus than by nitrogen.
Different nutrient limitations.
Right. And critically, while nitrogen deposition is increasing, the actual rates across most of the vast Amazon interior remain relatively low. It's more concentrated near agricultural frontiers, not deep in these mature forest plots.
So CO2 fits the geographic pattern better.
CO2 fits the pattern much better. Its increase is global, consistent year after year, decade after decade. It's the most plausible single driver for this basin-wide structural shift we're seeing.
The implications are pretty massive then. This change in forest structure, bigger trees, more biomass concentrated upwards, is fundamental to how the Amazon functions as a carbon sink.
Absolutely. It seems this CO2 fertilization effect has been propping up, even enhancing the Amazon's ability to absorb carbon over the last few decades, despite the other pressures.
This has been a fascinating deep dive, really getting into the ground truth at what's happening structurally.
It changes the perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. So the synthesis seems clear. The Amazon's structure has fundamentally changed over the last 30 years. It's become more dominated by giant trees. And this seems driven by a resource boost, most likely CO2, which has, for now, more than compensated for the negative impacts of climate stress.
An unexpected resilience, you could say.
Yeah. And as those huge trees now hold so much of the forest's carbon, their fate becomes absolutely critical, right?
Their future growth, and maybe more importantly, their future mortality rates, will determine the trajectory of the entire Amazonian carbon sink. Everything hinges on these giants now.
So this study shows resilience up to this point, but it leaves us with a pretty sharp question for the future.
It does, and it's something for you, the listener, to really chew on. We see the benefits of CO2 have outweighed the stresses so far, but if the climate stresses, the droughts, the heat waves, the intense storms keep getting worse, keep increasing in frequency and intensity, as all the projections suggest, how much longer can that CO2 benefit keep winning? How long until the scales tip and the increasing vulnerability of those crucial, giant, carbon packed trees starts to outweigh the fertilization effect? That delicate race, that accelerating tension between the CO2 boost and the climate stress, might be what ultimately decides the fate of the Amazon as we know it.